Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound. Today I'll be taking a look at the Dietrich OT-1. Dietrich is a very interesting and very different watch brand that has been around for a little while now, maybe like a year, maybe two, and they have a very unique approach to design. The brand was founded by Emmanuel Dietrich, hence the name of the brand. The name of the watch, and he is a French-born industrial designer, and he has kind of manifested his thoughts on what we call organic time, what he calls organic time, into this timepiece, this conceptual timepiece, if you will, called OT for organic time. I'll start by saying it's a very bizarre watch. It's very strange, it's complicated in how it's built, and it's not for everybody. I mean, it's an aesthetic unto itself. It doesn't really fall in easily into the categories that we typically, place various watches in. I mean, I'd call it a sport watch in the end because it's robust and everything like that, but the look of it is very interesting and strange, and it has this concept of being organic. So kind of with pieces that are more based on the world around us than they are, furniture or automobiles. And, there's other designers and architects that work in this vein. That comes to mind. You have Ross Lovegrove, another industrial designer. You have Zaha Hadid in architecture, who work with flowing forms and things that wrap around and bend and flow. And, it's a type of design that's only been able, people have been able to really do it in the last, 20 years, maybe even less than that, because manufacturing really had to come up to meet that type of design, because it's very complicated. It takes milling and things like that from various different directions, very complicated computer-controlled machining. And that's really what interests me about this watch in particular. The aesthetic, I'm not even 100% sure if I love myself, though I find it very interesting, but it's the complexity of the shapes, of the forms, of the manufacturing in this piece that I think makes it a very unique piece, a very fascinating piece, and really one worth taking a closer look at. So the watch itself comes in at $1,215. There are some pieces that cost more than that, and they have carbon fiber elements in them as well, but this one's $1,215. It does have a sapphire crystal here with an AR coating. I'll go into details on that because it's kind of a crazy sapphire crystal. And it's powered by a Miyota O2S7 automatic movement in it. So, I think people are really immediately going to react. They think it's probably overpriced in the eyes of a lot of people. I'd argue that it is probably fairly priced for the amount of complexity and machining that goes in here, because nothing on this is even remotely stock. And a lot of these pieces, I think require types of machining that are way beyond what you'll find in a normal, like, Asian-made watch in the several $100s range, even up to $2,000. There's really just complexity built in here. So let's take a closer look. So I'm going to start by taking a look at the case of the Dietrich OT-1. I took it off the strap because it'll just make the case a lot more visible, the various elements of it and how it's constructed. There's a lot of pieces going into it that make it a very interesting design, and certainly a very unique one. So starting with the size, it's a little hard to kind of give this an exact size, but it's around 46.5 millimeters wide and about like 47 millimeters long, and then it's like 48 millimeters to the lugs, but it's all like strange shapes and the way it kind of comes and goes. So it doesn't really, it's kind of hard to pin down how it exactly wears, but it wears, I think, smaller than a 46.5 millimeter watch normally would, because of the flowing shapes and everything like that. But it's not a small watch by any means either. As you can see, the shape of it is sort of like a barrel, but it's also sort of a blown out kind of hexagon. So you have 6 sides, but they flow into each other, and they're not quite equilateral, or that's the sides aren't at equal lengths. And that gives it this kind of flowing form, flowing shape, which obviously is part of this organic time. And there's not a lot of straight edges, 90-degree angles, or anything like that on here, really save the crown, which is the most kind of classical piece. And, actually, just to get into that right now, maybe it's only the part that doesn't really fit in with the theme, that maybe the crown could have been a little bit more flowing and organic or played off of this shape. But as is, it is an easy crown to grasp. You also have multiple finishes here, obviously, as you can see. So you have this top part is a matte bead blasted classic steel. You have 4 of these little black screw heads in here, and those kind of link to an element on the dial. And then you have this under chassis, which, take a look at, it's kind of hard to see exactly It is matte black PVD. The whole thing is about 14.5 millimeters tall there. It's about 17.5 millimeters tall if you measure the bottom of these kind of flanging forms. This is one of the parts here that I think is really remarkably well constructed. So this is a piece that is actually kind of like bolted on from below, this kind of sled-shaped lug assembly here. And if you look at it closely, it's entirely smooth and flowing. Everything on here kind of swirls around and every angle flows back over, and it's exceptionally beautiful, really gets that kind of organic feel. This is really kind of has that organic architectural feel to me. It's simply a beautiful piece visually. It has a nice feel to it. And obviously, as you can see, there's no spring bars on this. So those function as pass-through lugs, and which gives it an interesting, the way the straps work, interesting. I'll get into strap later, but they've designed some very cool straps for these watches because of that. And the shape of this, how it kind of flows and gets thinner here, and there's this large arc, is designed to fit on your wrist very nicely. And it, when we'll get to the wrist, you'll see it fits so well. I mean, this watch just kind of like plugs onto your wrist in a very cool way. You also have this little mark here, and this is interesting how this is done. So OT1, that's on a little part, like a little flat side that just kind of comes out. It's a simple detail, but it's one of those things that I imagine it's like not exactly easy to make. So I mean, I imagine a piece like this is actually could be cast and then it has to be milled from every direction to get this perfectly flowing, smooth surface. I'm personally very impressed by that from a manufacturing standpoint, and I think it's attractive. Simple case back here, has a simple screw-in design, has 50 millimeter water resistance on the watch. So, it's not meant for diving, obviously, but 50 meters should give you, decent splash resistance or whatever, so you can get it accidentally wet. Now, one of the crazier details also is this crystal. So it is a sapphire crystal. It is a doming sapphire crystal. It's a gentle dome going across the top here. But as you can see, the shape is completely irregular. With the sapphire crystals, they're actually very expensive comparatively to other components. I mean, like in the assembly of a watch, they are a little disproportionately priced. And when they become weirder shapes, they become even weirder prices. And the tolerances needed here go up and up and up. So to mill a piece like this, that is shaped like that has this coffin kind of shape to begin with, and then it has these little insets here, how it flows around these screws, then mounts in there, and still has, tight enough seals to get any water resistance. I mean, it's a complex piece that has to be made extremely well, and it's a very attractive piece too. You can see it has a little bevel along the edge too before it domes. So it's just a really well executed, quite complicated sapphire crystal. It's also AR coated underneath, and as you can see here too, and to kind of get into the dial, there's actually markers etched into the crystal itself, so they're floating above the dial, and that's just, yet another element that was built into this that has to be very precise. So yeah, I mean, overall, I think there's just a lot to get into here, and then it's all very well executed. I mean, the tolerances, the finishing, the feel of it's as solid as a rock. I'm just very impressed by it, and then the design itself, to me, visually interesting. The dial of the Dietrich OT1 is also equally complicated. It's a multi-layered dial with some really wild shapes in it that I'll do my best to describe, though there isn't really, a logical necessarily vocabulary for describing some of them. So. It's 4 layers that kind of start on the base here above a skeletonized opening. So right in the center there, you can actually see the Miyota movement. You can see the escapement just above 6 ticking away. And that kind of serves as a backdrop to the watch. It's an interesting move there. And, I once again to compare it to the 7 Friday watches, they use a similar approach. There, though, is about making the whole thing look like a machine, and here it's not quite as much. So I don't know if that's entirely necessary there, especially since the movement's untreated and it looks a little bit, the movement itself is the least aesthetically pleasing part of this watch because of how ornate everything is. So just starting that, but it's only actually a small part of the dial. And then you step out and there's a black ring, and on this ring you have 12, 6, some markers, and the word automatic. Then you step out and you have a vertically brushed like gunmetal PVD layer. Step out further and you have this black layer on the outside that has some markers for minutes. So you see 10 over there, 40 over there. It's also labeled with 24-hour counter in the top left over by 10. And then there's like a plugged in piece here for small second as you can see, and that's like actually a little bridge that's screwed in, and that has a tiny little index there where this strange starfish shape thing is turning away, and that is actually the second hand of the watch. So it's more about something in motion than it is obviously about counting seconds. And then you have another layer up top, Dietrich and OT1, and that's also in this brushed metal. So there's a lot of kind of depth going on here, and that's really only at the start of it. So you'll also notice traversing the entire inside is a strange black structure. Crosses from the screws, kind of crisscrosses within itself, has this very organic, very plant life sort of shape to it. I don't know if it actually serves a purpose. I don't know if it's actually holding anything in or if it's just aesthetic, but it's a very kind of a statement-making piece. It's almost like there was this watch that was in existence and it got like taken over by an organic form, and that's kind of an interesting element to it. Definitely a little bit bizarre. Here at 10, you have a 24-hour counter, and that is executed actually in a very cool way. So you have a disc with the numbers on it. It might be a little hard to see, but right there, the numbers are basically seen in silhouette against a bright green, actually loomed panel there. So at night that glows. There's a cool effect to it, and it's all skeletonized in this lacy and intricate pattern that has that same kind of organic plant life kind of shape, sort of like this golden star wheel thing here. It's just all very strange, and I think the strangest part for me is how the various things kind of respond to each other. So you have like a shape like that, which is really organic, and then you have some numerals around, which are really kind of a basic feeling. I mean, there's the font itself, the typeface is very simple, very geometric, and the lines there are just straight lines. So there's almost sort of a conflict, which, like I said, kind of in my mind tells this story of this organic thing coming into like an existing watch or something like that. I wonder if I would like to see it also what it would have been like with more organic sort of numerals and shapes in there, maybe getting rid of some of these labels like small second and 24-hour counter. I mean, you don't need them, obviously. They feel like they're teaching you something and you only need to see that once. So, maybe there's a sticker when you start, but right now, like once you see it, you get it. So I don't know how those work into the organic concept itself. Now, looking at the crystal again, like I said, you have this index here kind of etched in. This is a very interesting approach to doing it, and I like what they did here because it's very faint. Like it's not like, it doesn't prevent you from looking through into the complexity of the dial, and it adds a lot of depth because like the distance from that back of the crystal all the way down is like several millimeters at least. So it gives this really like long distance feel to it. And then, they're faint. They're just kind of this glassy looking etching. So as the hands pass under them, you can just kind of see through them. And I like that. I think it's a cool way of having an index in it, but it makes these other indexes a little bit less important too. And once again, I wonder if they were really necessary or if just something done on the crystal, which is such a cool concept, could have really been enough. Now looking at the hands here, you have a very striking set of hour and minute hands. They're made out of these wispy little thin skeletonized lines in this bright lime green. The shape is this funny leaf shape coming off of like a stem, obviously very organic feeling. They even almost look like they're not quite straight, like things bend a little bit and kind of, it's a cool look. Very, very, very different, obviously. And those are filled with this bright green loom, which actually is glows pretty well. And interestingly, it's clearly like a skeletonized area that's filled with loom. So because of the distance, you can actually see it glowing then on the dial. Like it glows down onto the dial once it's really fully charged. So yeah, it's a very interesting dial, very complicated, definitely a unique look. I mean, like I said, you can't really pinpoint what this is, where it fits in. I think you either just like it or you don't. I think it's definitely very intriguing to me. I just get lost in it. I like looking at all the little details and how they correspond, and that's not something you find on every watch. Taking a look at the Dietrich OT1 on the wrist, it wears exceptionally well. I mean, where you don't expect it to, but when you strap this watch on your wrist, you realize that the design really did take into consideration how it would fit and how it would feel when being worn. So despite being quite, a sizable watch and a tall watch, it sits very well. It sits, I have a 7-inch wrist here. It's not very long. You can see that because of how the lugs are used as a pass-through style, they disappear entirely. And then you have just this part almost floating up off the strap. It's a very cool effect because the watch kind of comes out towards you, and then it just feels like the watch is, yay long, which is, in the 46.5, 47 millimeter range, which is quite short. So, it fits very well, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but probably not from there, but there's the way this thing curves across the wrist is perfect. And, it's not going anywhere. It fits it's very comfortable. The way this kind of lug chassis piece here is perfectly smooth, just makes it feel very nice against the skin too. I like that all that was taken into consideration. So it's ergonomics on top of this kind of concept of organic design, which is just sign of a good design, if you will. Now the aesthetic, obviously, like I said, it's wild, it's bizarre, it's not for everybody, and I think you probably have already decided whether or not it's for you. But if you're into things that are a little bit different, a little bizarre, a little futuristic almost, I think that it'll be very appealing. To me, like I said, I find it just so striking and different, and from what I look at typically in watches, that I do find it very appealing in some way. Sometimes when you see watches that are very different, quote unquote, they're museum or design shop watches, they're quartz, they're inexpensive, and they don't have the feel and substance of a real watch. And this has that feel. So it's really like you're wearing a really solid, well-made, piece of equipment here, which I like. So then you get that strange kind of concept in there. And it comes across in the end as being almost sporty. Obviously the strap that they have this on here, which I'll talk about in a second, is a very sporty strap, but the mix of the black and the silver and the layers, and, there's something very masculine about it, very robust. The one thing I'll say that with the organic time thing and the way this thing kind of looks is like, I almost wonder if there's two directions, and they're almost conflicting a little bit. Like, I would love to see the exact same case with hands and everything that were more, not classical, but we're more linear, or we're, maybe responding to this form a little bit, and came a little bit more towards like a really kind of aggressive, sporty watch, because I think they have this format here that I think would work so well for that. And then ones that went further, totally the other direction. What kind of wilder with the material choices, like I said before, kind of got rid of all those numerals and everything, maybe did even more sort of artistic things. Right now, the in-between just makes it, like I want it to be a little bit more one or the other. But, that also could just be me. Now looking at the strap here, so they have this pass-through strap system. So already, that's going to limit your strap choices. You need it to be a fully pass-through strap. So obviously you can put on like your own nylon straps, whatever, but they make a bunch of straps, and they do a really good job on these. So this one has this tapering shape, and it's black perforated leather with this bright green stitching. It's a little on the nose for the watch, but it's a very soft and comfortable strap, so it's it feels very good. I'm going to take it off quickly. Oh, and before I do, actually, you can see the buckle here, very nicely shaped buckle, unique for the brand too. It just kind of fits in. I'm going to take it off and show you then just what it looks like, because the construction is interesting. So it passes through, and this is the shape of it. So it's actually a very different strap for a pass-through, because it acts like it's a two-piece strap. So you have a long taper, and then it cuts into a center part here that fits under the strap, and it gets narrow and it's thin, so it doesn't add too much bulk to the watch itself, and then it comes back out and tapers again, and then you have this whole padded area that's kind of sewn in. So they did a good job of mixing the concept of a single pass with the feel of a two-piece strap. And obviously they are making their own straps for it, so it's not like you're stuck with one strap. It is sort of a proprietary system, but they are at least filling it out slowly but surely with some cool options. So I think it's a different approach. I like that they thought through the process of these straps a little bit more than I think most people do. To wrap up with the Dietrich OT1, they've created something very interesting and very different, and I think that's very apparent in the way it looks. And like I said before, and I just keep kind of reiterating, this is a strange watch. It's not necessarily a watch that everyone's going to like, but I think it's a watch that people should appreciate, because it is so kind of out there. It's trying to do its own thing, and does a lot of really wonderful things, especially in terms of the manufacturing of it. I mean, those shapes, those forms shouldn't be really underestimated. That they're not typical for a watch, and that's largely because they're complicated to make and they're expensive to make, and they use, not necessarily the same exact kind of processes that a normal case would use to make. I mean, that lug piece underneath, that has to be shaped from all sides, and that's not something you're going to find on other watches, really in this price category, or, frankly, it takes a very specific design in general. So it's a very unique piece. It's an interesting approach too. And I like that thing isn't just aesthetic. It wasn't just slapped on to be gnarly looking. It gives the watch this interesting ergonomic shape to it, and they built this whole strap system around it. I mean, it's a single pass strap, but it's more, it's better thought out than your average single pass strap. And just all that stuff, I just really like all that stuff. I think it's very cool and very interesting, and it speaks to where the price of this watch is coming from, because obviously it's not an inexpensive watch. It's $1,200, and typically watches with the Miyota 8 series movements are less expensive than that, but that's not the only part you're paying for, is the thing. You're really paying for design, you're paying for manufacturing, you're paying for quality, and I really think the quality is there, and certainly the concept is executed very well, whether you're into it or not. Please read the full review. I'll get more into all the shapes and everything in the dial there, and more into my thoughts on everything. Thank you for watching. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you.